Hello. Today we are going to study the cosine, and so it's going to be stretching, compressing, reflecting, and translating cosine graphs. Again, we're going to start with the unit circle and with labeling our coordinates. So in this case, we are labeling the cosine. So again, you need to know your SOHCAHTOA, okay, and your triangles and unit circle. So if you cannot do any of those, some of those you need to review. So let's get started. So I'm going to start first with 0, 0. So cosine in 0, 0, it is cosine of 0. So notice that in this case it is 1 because it is opposite over hypotenuse. So the sine, a cosine is adjacent over the hypotenuse, so it is 1. If I'm looking at pi, so if you look at pi, pi is -1, 0, so cosine is your x, so this case is -1. And 2 pi, again, 360 is 1. If we look at pi over 2, so pi over 2, my coordinate is 0, 1. So that's in cosine is going to be 0. 3 pi over 2, cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, which is 270, which is 0. And now I'm going to find 45-degree angle, which is radical 2 over radical 2. So that one stays the same, which is radical 2 over 2, which is 0.7. 3 pi over 4 is negative radical 2 over 2, which is 0.7. And pi over 4 is negative radical 2 over 2, which is again negative 0.7. And 7 pi over 4 is radical 2 over 2, which is 0.7. So when we talk about the cosine, that's your x value. Notice that we are using the unit circle again. So adjacent over hypotenuse. Let's graph, and the first thing we're going to label, so I'm going to label this again 1, I'm going to label this again -1, and we're going to count, I'm going to go by 4, so 1, 2, 3, 4, this is my pi, this is my 1, 2, 3, 4, this is my 2 pi, 1, 2, 3, 4, 3 pi, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 pi, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pi, and 1, 2, 3, 4, negative pi. Okay, so this one is going to be a little bit different than yesterday. Remember how yesterday we had reference point and we had 3 of them. This one's going to be a little bit different where 0, 1 is your coordinate. So cosine starts above the midline. So if we have to identify the midline would be your axis, and your reference point is going to be above the midline. It's going to be, length is going to be 2 pi, and in 2 pi, again, you end here. Halfway, pi is -1, and then pi over 2, which is here, and 3 pi over 2 is over here. That's when the axis is 0. So it's going to be 0 and 0. So curvature, 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 and this is your 1 period. So we would call this period 2 pi because it goes from 2 pi is the length of the period. So technically, if I'm continuing, you're going to continue. This is going to go through middle. This is going to end. So it kind of goes for here forever. And then here goes in the middle, goes down, middle, up, middle, and down. So let's see if I can connect. And just like yesterday, you do not have to do all of the periods. It's enough to just do one period. Domain has not changed. So domain is open brackets, negative infinity to positive infinity. And range again has a limit, -1 to +1, close brackets because it ends there. Period in the function that we looked is 2 pi, and amplitude was 1, again, always positive. So what type of transformation of the graph f of x equals sine x produces the graph f of x equals cosine of x? So basically it shifts left or right. Okay. Shifts left or right. Okay, so let's go over the rules for writing the equation again, just like yesterday, and then we are going to go over the rules for graphing. So rules for graphing is find amplitude. Most of it is the same, but the graphs are going to, of course, be different. So find amplitude, that's the absolute value of A. You find your period, and this time your the period is going to be 2 pi over b, absolute value of b. And then you're going to find reference point. And draw midline. And your midline is y is equal to d. D is your midline. You are going to find reference point. X is going to be bx minus c equals to 0, and y is equal to d. So pretty much the same as yesterday. To graph, then number 4, you're going to label axis to fit the graph. So label axis to fit the graph. And you need to label the reference point plus period. Then you need to plot starting point and you need to remember that you're going to plot starting point above and below. It is not reference point. It's not going to be on midline, okay? And you're going to plot cycle endpoint and points between. and draw a curve. And draw a curve. So what's important to remember is that what's going to look like, you're going to have your midline, and either you're going to have opens down or you're going to have opens up. Okay, so the reference point, the points, starting points are not on the midline. The starting points are above the midline. Okay, so let's get started. The first one you have amplitude is easy. In this case, it's 2. So period, again, we need to calculate. It's going to be 2 pi. I'm going to squeeze it here over 1. So that means your period is just 2 pi. And your reference point is going to be x minus pi equals to 0, which is x is equal to pi. And so my reference point is pi comma, this is your k, negative 1. Pi comma negative 1. So I know if I label this by 1, this is going to be negative 2, this is going to be positive 2. So my midline is going to be at negative 1. Okay. My reference point in this case is going to be pi and negative 1. Oops, I gotta label my. So 1, 2, 3, 4. This is my pi. 1, 2, 3, 4. This is my 2 pi. And 1, 2, 3, 4. This is my 3 pi. Okay. So my reference point is pi and negative 1. So this is my reference point. Now remember, reference point is not your starting point. Okay. So this is positive. Let's go back to our graph. This is your reference point, and this is your start. Notice the difference, okay? So this is my reference point, and this is, so first thing I'm going to label the period. So period is 2 pi, so this is 1 pi, 2 pi. So I know this is my period. So my period goes from here to here, and my period is 2 pi. Okay, so the first thing is I'm going to count from my midline. I'm going to count my amplitude 2. So 1, 2. I'll do this in different color. So here's my starting point, and in the end, right, 1, 2. So you're going to end here as well. Okay. Now, in the middle, right, I'm going to count 1, 2 down. So from midline, 1, 2. And halfway is going to cross. Halfway is going to cross. So now you're just going to curve. So you kind of have like a little curvature here. Go down. Oops, I missed my point, but you get the point. So this is your A. This is the reference point, right? So let's look at the next one. In the next one, your amplitude is 4. My period is 2 pi divided by pi over 2. Okay, 2 pi divided by pi over 2. So the easiest way I can explain this is copy dot flip. So it's going to be 2 pi divided by pi over 2, which is 2 pi times 2 over pi, which is equal to 4, because the pi's cancel. So my period is just 4. Okay, so 2 pi divided by pi over 2 is make change in the division of the fraction. Then you know that the division of the fraction changes is the copy dot flip. So period is 4. Now I need to find my reference point, and my reference point is pi over 2x equals to 0. Well, of course, this is just going to be 0, 0. So my reference point is 0, 0. So 0, 0. Here is going to be my midline, because remember, this is your reference. And you go by 4, so I can count by 2. So this is my 1, 2, 3, and 4. Notice that there's no pi's attached here. This is just, and my amplitude is 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So that fits. So this is positive 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. This is negative 4. So my starting point is above 4. So this is your starting point. This is start. And this is your A. Okay, so start and end. And the middle goes down. And then half between. So curve down, curve up. And make sure you kind of put the arrows at the end. That's sufficient. Okay? So cosine is opposite from sine. Sine starts on a midline. Cosine starts amplitude above the midline. Okay, let's go to the next page. So when we look at the next one, first of all, we want to pay attention that it's negative, so you need to remember you're going to be reflect. So amplitude is positive 2. The period is going to be 2 pi over b, which is 2 pi over 2. So period is a pi. And reference point is going to be 2x equals 0. So this is just x equals to 0. So reference point is 0, 0. So reference point is 0, 0. My midline is going to be right on the axis. And that means I'm going to reflect. So instead of up to, oh wait, I need to label this. So I'm going to go, this is going to be 2, and this is going to be negative 2. So instead of going up, I'm instead of going down. See how we went down, down, and down. This is negative, so where are we going to go with negative? Opposite, which is going to be up. So instead of starting up, you're going to start below 2. So this is my starting. And my period is pi. So if I may label 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is your pi. So from here to here, this is period. And so I'm going to end here. And then in the middle, you're going to go up and then halfway. So in this case, I'm going to curve, go up, curve, and go down. So here's your graph. Because it's negative, it's going to go up. Okay, so one way to remember it, cosine is always going to be happy, smiley face, unless it's negative, and then it's going to be a frown. Okay, let's look at the next example. This one's a little bit trickier because you have 1/4, so you're going to have to carefully label. So the amplitude is 1/4. And then the period is going to be 2 pi over 2, which is just pi. So my period is just pi. And let's calculate. I'm going to do it over here. So I'm going to find my reference point. So it's going to be 2x plus pi over 2 equals to 0. So the first thing you're going to do is subtract pi over 2. So you have 2x equals negative pi over 2. I know this is tedious, and believe it or not, a lot of you mess up here on the simple stuff. So now, to get rid of 2, you're going to divide by 2. And so in this case, x is equal to negative pi over 4. So reference point is negative pi over 4, comma, and k is 1/2, so it's just going to be positive 1/2. Okay, so this is 1/2. That gives you the midline. So my midline is at positive 1/2. So I will count it. So this will be my 1/2. This will be my 1. And so my midline is at positive 1/2. Okay. So the next thing I need to decide, I need to scale. Let's see, I have pi over 4, so I'm just going to count, each one is going to be the fourth. So my reference is negative pi over 4 and 1/2. So negative pi over 4 and 1/2. So this is my reference. And my period is a pi, so this is pi over 4, sorry. Okay, that's pi over 4 and 1/2. And so this is going to be fourth, this is going to be pi over 2, this is going to be fourth, this is going to be a pi. So pi over 4, so it's going to be pi is my period, so it's going to be negative pi over 4 to 3 pi over 4. So right here is my period, which is just pi. So again, this is positive, so that means I'm going to go up. My amplitude is 1/4, so this is 1/2. 1/4 will just be 1 up, so this is 1 up. I end and this right here, so here and then 1 up. And then the middle, I go 1 down, and these cross exactly. So, yeah, and arrows. Okay, so this is your reference point, this is your starting point, this is your amplitude, and here's your period. Hopefully you guys are doing good. Okay, let's do the next one. So the amplitude here is 2. Period is going to be 2 pi over what's in front of x2. So period is just pi. My reference point, I'm going to do it here. Now, for reference point, you need to calculate, and so x plus pi, so x minus pi, sorry. Oh, x minus pi. So x minus pi equals to 0. X is equal to pi. So my reference point is pi and negative 2. So pi and negative 2. That means at negative 2 is your midline. So negative 2, let's make it here. This is my positive 2. And then he is going to be negative 2, and then my period is just pi. So I'll just count by 4s. So 1, 2, 3, 4. This is my pi. 1, 2, 3, 4. This is 2 pi. 1, 2, 3, 4. This is 3 pi. So my reference is pi and negative 2. And from here, I have a period. So from here to here is my period, which is just pi. And so you're going to count amplitude 2. So here is my amplitude 2 up and up, from the middle down, middle, middle. So curve, curve, and over. Okay? Here is your reference point, pi and negative 2, up 2, so this is your amplitude. and the period is over here. Okay, let's look at the next one. And so next one is the amplitude is +3. So here you have to pay attention to something. It's negative, so you need to remember that you're going to reflect. So period is going to be 2 pi over x over 2 is same as 1/2. So I'm going to do the work here. So it's going to be 2 pi divided by 1/2, which is 2 pi times the reciprocal, which is 2 over 1, which is 4 pi. Okay, so my period is 4 pi. Reference point. X over 2 minus pi over 8 equals 0. So x over 2 equals pi over 8. And now you're going to multiply both sides by 2. So x is equal to pi over 4. So pi over 4, comma 1, because k is 1. So that just goes here. So your midline is at +1. So if I go by 1, so this is going to be just 1. So this is 1, 2, -1, -2. And my period is 4 pi. So I'm just going to count by 2. So 1, 2. So this is going to be my pi. 1, 2. This is going to be my 2 pi, 3 pi, 4 pi. So now my reference point is pi over 4 and 1. So this is pi over 2. Pi over 4 will be halfway. So pi over 4 and 1. And my period is 4 pi. So since I didn't start at 0, 0, so it's going to be 4 pi and 1/4. So this is where it's going to end. It is negative, right? So instead of up, I'm going to go down. How many? 3. So 1, 2, 3. So that means you're at -2 halfway. You are on -2 halfway. And at 2 pi, you're going to go 1, 2, and 3. Sorry, it's not 2 pi. It's 2 pi and 1/4. So 2 pi and 1/4, you're going to go up from midline 3. So here it is. And then halfway, so 1 and 1/4, you're going pi and 1/4, you're going to cross the midline. And then 3 pi and 1/4, you're going to cross the midline. So you look something like that. Okay. So from, oops, I didn't really do a good job drawing, but sorry. So this is your amplitude, and then your period is 4 pi. Okay, so hopefully you're doing good. It's opposite of sine, so you just have to remember how to graph. Remember, you're going to graph the reference point, and then from reference point, if it's a positive, you're going to count up. For starting point, if it's negative, you're going to go down. And for the starting point. Okay, the next thing is I'm going to go over the steps for writing the equations. So the first thing, you're going to identify the midline to get A. So identify midline to get A. And then you're going to identify reference point, HK, and then you're going to identify and midline, right? And then you're going to identify the period. period to solve for b. We'll identify the period to solve for b, and then you're going to plug in a, b, h, and k into y is equal to a cosine b parenthesis x minus h plus k. And just like in a sine, you have to distribute b, and so you're going to write your final answer as y is equal to a cosine bx minus bh plus k. So, oh, sorry, this is the equation. So, identify midline to get an A, identify reference point, HK, identify the period to solve for B, and then plug it into your equation, and don't forget to distribute at the end. Okay? So very, very similar to sine, except this is a cosine. So let's get started. You have your graph, and let's see. So the first thing is you need to kind of look at the graph and remember the cosine does not start at your midline. So cosine, I'm looking here and I'm like, okay, so here I am, I go down and then I go up and I go down. Again, you can start somewhere else and it's going to be positive. So in this case, I always need to identify where do you start. So in this case, I'm going to start here. My midline is the origin, so x-axis. So this is my midline. So my reference point is going to be right here. This is my 0, 0. And this is your starting point. So go up and then down. This is your end point. This is your period. And so if you count how much you go, period is 4 pi. 4 pi is your period, and your amplitude is from 0 to 3, so A equals to 3. So now that you have your period, you would have 4 pi is equal to 2 pi over absolute value of b. And so if I'm solving, I'm just going to multiply both sides by b. So b times 4 pi equals 2 pi. Divide by 4 pi. And b is equal to, pi's cancel, so 1/2. B is equal to 1/2. So my reference is 0, 0. So when I'm writing my equation, I need to recognize that it is opposite, so it's negative. So y is equal to negative 3 cosine to 1/2 x. And I don't have to plus or minus anything because it's 0, 0. Okay. Let's look at the next one. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to look and see if you can identify where is the midline. Okay, so where is the midline? So let's see. I will start. Let's go. I will start here. And then here. So this is going to be my period. And so if I'm identifying my midline, my middle, I'm looking this way. So it's going to be here. And -1. So my A is 2. My reference point is pi, comma, -1. And my period is 1, 2, wait, 2, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. So my period is 4 pi. Okay, so 4 pi equals 2 pi over b. Again, multiply by b. So 4 pi b equals to 2 pi. Divide by 4 pi. B is 1/2. Again, so b is 1/2. So now I notice I'm going down, so that's the correct sign. So y is equal to, amplitude is 2, so 2 cosine, b is 1/2, so it's going to be 1/2 x. Now, x is going to be minus pi and -1. Now, this is not my final answer because remember what you have to do. You have to distribute. So your final answer is going to be y is equal to 2 cosine parenthesis 1/2 x minus pi over 2, and I'm running out of room, minus 1. Okay, -1. Okay, last two, yay! Okay, let's look and see if we can identify the cycle. So let's see, I'm gonna use this as my starting point, and I'm gonna use this as my end point. So that means my period will be right here, and this is period is 2 pi. Next thing I need to identify is my amplitude halfway to here. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this is 6. I can count 1, 2, 3. So this means positive 2 is my midline. Okay, so positive 2 is my midline. That makes my reference point 0, 2. That's my H, that's my K. My amplitude, A is equal to 3. Okay, so 2 pi is equal to 2 pi over B. So B 2 pi equals 2 pi. B equals 2 pi over 2 pi, or 1. B is 1. Okay, so putting it all together would be y is equal to, A is 3, so 3 cosine. My B is 1, so I don't have to technically write there, so it's just cosine x plus 2, because this is your midline and this is what you shifted, k plus 2. Okay, last one. Oh, and then this one, I went like this. Okay, last one. Again, it's very important for you to identify to me where do you start, when you end. You choose which one. So you might have a little bit different starting point, but your equation, amplitude, and B should be the same. So I am looking, let's see where I'm going to start. I am going to start here, and so I'm going to have a negative. So here, oh, excuse me, here. So this is pi over 4 and 5 pi over 4. So the length of the period is just pi. And so to find my, so pi is equal to 2 pi over b multiplied by b. So b pi equals to 2 pi, divide by pi, and b equals to 2. So b is 2, and notice I'm going up, so this is going to be reflection. And I need to identify my reference point, and I need to identify my midline. So I need to see, so go from -3 up to 1. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So that means it's going to be 2. 1, 2. So that means it's at -1. So your midline is at -1. Did you see what I did? Basically, I counted how many from here down, and then you find halfway. So my reference point is right here. So this is pi over 2. This is going to be pi over 4, comma, -1. Pi over 4 and -1. So let's put it all together. And I'm going to do it underneath here because I'm going to have to distribute. So y is equal to negative, right? Because I need to remember to reflect. Negative, oh, I didn't say my a. My a is here, and my a is 2. So it's going to be -2 cosine 2 times x minus pi over 4 minus 1. Okay, now we are not done because what do we still have to do? We need to distribute. So your final answer is going to be y is equal to -2 cosine 2x minus, what is, so I'm going to do this on a side, and please don't forget to distribute. So this would be on the side here, 2 times pi over 4, and notice it would just become pi over 2. Hopefully you can do this. So it's just going to be 2x minus pi over 2. And don't forget, in your reference point, you have this -1, so it has to be -1. Okay? Again, make sure you pay attention. So here you have -1, so you have to include 1 minus 1. And here you need to make sure that you distribute to the parentheses so you get the right answer. These are the notes. Go ahead and start on the homework. Please make sure that you review the circle and make sure that you carefully analyze and remember the difference between graphing sines and graphing cosines. Thank you.